Hey, Damien here for Automotive Superstore. Now, if you're shopping for an amplifier, you may have found that there's an almost endless choice of different models and sizes and ranges and brands to choose from. And if you've not got much experience in shopping for amplifiers, it might be a bit daunting. That's what this video is about. I'm going to share with you the top 5 things you need to know when searching for any amplifier on our website. Let's get stuck in. So tip number 1, count the amount of channels you've got in your car and try and work out how many total amplifier channels you really need. Now, there's a lot of choice here because there's so many amplifiers to choose from, but let's just start with the basics. A good sound system is going to have full range speakers doing stereo, which is left and right audio in the front of the car, and 1 channel at least powering a subwoofer, so you've got some decent bass in the car. A couple of choices there. A good starting point is to pick up a 4-channel amplifier like this one here from Alpine. You use 2 of the channels to run the left and right fronts, and you bridge the other 2, which means you turn 2 channels into 1 more powerful channel to run a subwoofer. There are some limitations with that about what kind of impedances and voice coils and stuff, but I'll get more into that a bit later on. But basically, that's a good way to get started in choosing an amplifier to get everything done in one go. If you've got rear speakers in the car, you can just leave those running off the factory head unit or the aftermarket head unit in the rear as an option. Alternatively to that, then you can go to a 5-channel, and that will give you powered channels for the left and right fronts and rears, and then a dedicated channel for the subwoofer. Or you can just add a mono amplifier to the 4-channel that you've chosen. That route actually gives you a bit more flexibility to decide how much power you want for each. You can just have a 4-channel of a certain size. You can have 50x4 or 60x4. And then depending on your subwoofer array, you could choose a different mono amplifier from even a different brand. And you can have one that could be 300 watts or 500 watts or 1000 watts to suit your needs. Another thing to consider with the number of channels that you need. If you've got a component set, let's say in the front of the car where you've got tweeters and mid-range drivers left and right, that could be considered 2 channels if there's a passive crossover in there that splits the frequencies between those speakers. But that could also be considered 4 channels if you want to drive that in what's called an active setup. So tip number 2, let's talk about power. How much power do you really need? Well, there's 2 main things that control that. One is what your SPL targets, your expectations of output are going to be. And number 2, how loud your car's interior is. And so someone who's got a Tesla is very different than someone who's got an old street machine with a loud V8 and exhaust in there, because the noise floor of the cars are vastly different. So to get the same perceived volume level, the Tesla's only going to need a fraction the power of the street machine. The truth is your car's probably somewhere between those extremes. If it's something that was built in the last 10 years, well, the factory amplification in that car is probably only going to have about 15-20 watts RMS per channel. And so maybe something around the 40 to 60 watts RMS, which might tend to be my go-to power recommendation for full range speakers, is going to be a really great power level. Now for subwoofers, the power output's really again determined by your SPL targets. For a modern car that's got a reasonably quiet interior that has maybe 110 or 112-inch subwoofer, anywhere from 300 to 500 watts RMS would probably be ample for moderate listening levels. If you've got a big 12 or 2 10s or 2 12s and you want more SPL and you want really big dynamics and lots of headroom, consider something from 6 to 1000 watts RMS of total power from your amplifier. Now then there's the impedance and output of the power of the amplifier equation to factor in, and people get a bit confused about this, so I'll try to explain it to you as simply as I can. Amplifiers don't have impedance. The impedance comes from the speaker system that you attach to the amplifier. So any amplifier has a minimum impedance load per channel that it can drive, and below that the amplifier might go into protection mode or shut down or even get damaged. That's important when you're shopping for a full range amplifier. Just look at the 4 ohm power ratings. There are a couple of speakers from some manufacturers that are 3 and 2 ohms, but by and large, it's a 4 ohm load. Therefore, the 4 ohm power ratings for full range amplifiers is what you've got to look at. Now with subwoofers, it's very different. Some amplifiers make their best power into a 2 ohm load. Some mono amplifiers make their best power into a 1 ohm load. And so you've got to be very careful about how you match the voice coils and the wiring of the subwoofers and the number of subwoofers you've got to arrange at the impedance load that is the minimum and no lower than the amplifier, because you want all the amplifier that you've paid for, but you don't want to damage the amplifier. So you want to aim for the nominal load that is the minimum recommended by the manufacturer of the amplifier. So tip number 3, what are all the dials and switches on these amplifiers? What do they do? And do I need to worry about them? Well, the answer to that last question is yes, absolutely you need to worry about them, because they control the amplifier. They make sure the amplifier is giving you all the power you paid for. It's not going into distortion, and it's also controlling what the filters are for the speakers that are connected to it so that they're playing in the correct frequency bands. That's all really important to get the full performance out of the amplifiers and the speakers. So let's run through them one at a time and just cover what each one of these controls, switches, or dials do. Let's talk about input sensitivity first. It doesn't control how loud the amplifier is, even though when you turn it up and down, the sound goes up and down. Its job is to match the amplifier's output to the different varying input levels from prior sources. If you've got a high-end aftermarket head unit that's got, say, 4 volts or 5 volt RMS pre-outs versus, say, 2 for a cheaper model, you need to adjust the input sensitivity to cope with that higher or that hotter incoming signal strength. You start with that at minimum, and then you tweak that and work your way up. All the treble and bass to flat, or the EQ to flat. Set your main volume control at, let's call it 2/3, if maximum 3/4 of the total volume control with a nice modern recording. And then start with your input sensitivity dials at minimum, and then turn them up until you get nice loud output without any distortion. Then there are the crossovers or filters. And these are the filters in the amp that split up the frequencies and send high frequencies to tweeters, or mid-range frequencies to mid-ranges, or low frequencies to subwoofers. General rule is subwoofers play beneath 100 Hertz, so you would set a low pass filter, so only low frequencies pass at somewhere between 70 and 100 Hertz, depending on how steep that filter is in the amplifier itself. And then you would apply a commensurate high pass filter to the mid-range on your amplifier, so that the mid-range takes over from that point and plays the frequencies above that. So then your entire frequency band is covered. Your woofers aren't trying to play treble, and your mid-range drivers aren't trying to play sub-bass. They're staying in the band of frequencies they work well at and play best at and handle the right amount of power at. Then on some amplifiers you might find bass boost, and that's going to be a boost for subwoofers that gives them an extra kick. Certainly around 40 to 50 Hertz seems to be where you can have a bit more bottom end for kick drum thump and for impact inside the car. Again, remember that your amplifier is only as powerful as it is. If it's a 500 watt amplifier, for example, and you've got the input sensitivity set right, so you're getting that full 500 watts. If you go and add 6 decibels of bass output at 40 Hertz, it can't make more than 500 watts at 40 Hertz, no matter how much you turn that dial. And so all you're doing is you're introducing the ability for it to make distortion at that frequency first. So you have to adjust the input sensitivity back a bit, commensurate with the amount of boost you put in. Add 3 dB of boost, pull out about 3 dB of input sensitivity to avoid clipping. These Alpine amplifiers and these Selwyn Vega amplifiers have a 3-position switch, and they can turn on and off depending on whether you just want to use a traditional 12 volt trigger, or a speaker level input, or just monitoring the voltage level of the actual charging system in the car. That's what that's for. Then you might have something called a subsonic filter on your mono amplifier. That's really just another crossover. It's a high pass filter for your subwoofers, and it'll traditionally start at around 10 Hertz and adjust up to, say, 40 or 50. That's important for ported boxes. So with a ported box, the port tuning frequency is really as low as you should run that subwoofer. Below that, you can run into power handling problems, certainly mechanical power handling problems. And so what you want to do is set that subsonic or that high pass filter just below port tuning. So if your port tuning's at 40 Hertz, set it at 30, something like that. Now finally, there's the new phenomenon of digital DSP amplifiers, and Alpine has a magnificent range of those, including this one here. This is called the Optimate. And so This one only has connections. It has no switches, it has no dials, nothing to adjust on the amplifier itself. When you install this in your car, you need to connect it to a laptop or to your phone and control all of those controls via an app or via your laptop with a program you download from Alpine. Now, it's a much more advanced way of tuning, but really the principles are exactly the same as tuning with knobs and dials and switches on the side of the amplifier, except you're just doing keystrokes and a mouse, or you're doing your finger on a screen. You're still doing input sensitivity control, you're still setting crossovers, but you also have advanced equalization and time correction that you don't have in amplifiers themselves. And so DSP amplifiers are a much more advanced way of getting more control and more tuning than a regular amplifier. And so that's why it's a better way to go ultimately. So tip number 4, let's talk about what you get as a benefit when you buy a higher level amplifier these days. Now, back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, the difference between a cheap amplifier and an expensive or a more pricey amplifier was very obvious, certainly in power output, but also you were paying for something that was built in, say, America or built in Europe as opposed to something that was built in China. Also, there were a lot more, let's call them no-name brands, prevalent back in those days from the chain stores, and that sort of thing's kind of gone away now. Really, like we only really stock genuine, legitimate brands from the legitimate importer. That's really important. That's what you're buying today. A lot of the junk is gone. What that means is, for a start, you can really rely on power ratings. Used to not be the case back in the day, and today, pretty much every amplifier makes within half a decibel of its rated power. If anything, it makes a little bit more power than it's rated at, but really you can rely on the power ratings these days compared to days before when all the power ratings were all overinflated or underinflated for whatever reason. The difference between buying an affordable or a more expensive amplifier these days is primarily down to features and really advancement. And we talked about before the digital DSP amplifiers from companies like Alpine, and these are 2 examples here. If I buy an entry-level 4-channel like this one here from Alpine, it's a traditional amplifier. It's just got your regular controls on the side and regular type of signal processing, whereas a more expensive amplifier will have greater levels of signal processing that will allow you to get really better sound quality because you've got much more advanced tuning tools. Feature-wise, one of the things is compactness. So a compact 5-channel amplifier like this tiny one here from Sherwin Vega, it's more expensive to package them in something so small, and it requires smaller components and more advanced manufacturing. And so you are paying for the compactness of these amplifiers compared to their larger, cheaper versions of amplifiers that make similar power. And you're also paying for things like remote level controllers that are built in, and really all the signal processing and features that were just unheard of 10, 20 years ago that are just now part of almost every amplifier model range. And finally, tip number 5, don't forget all the extra bits and pieces you'll need to get your amplifier running in your car. Primarily with that, it's going to be a power kit or an amplifier kit. A power kit just comes with the power, earth, trigger and fuse holder. A full amplifier kit will also come with RCAs, and we have 2-channel and 4-channel and 5-channel versions of those kits from various different suppliers. One of the benefits of buying the power kit is because then you can buy the RCAs to the length that you need. So if you've got a nice small amplifier like this that's up at the front of the car, then you might only need 2-meter RCAs or 3-meter RCAs, where if you've got a big amplifier like this, it's right at the back of the car, the full kit might be handy because it gives you the 5-meter RCAs anyway. Beyond that, when you're choosing between different models, think about the extra features you might need, and the great example is the remote level controller. If your car's less than 10 years old, these are a fantastic addition. The remote level controller is great because your factory sound system is probably integrated, and it's got CarPlay or Android Auto built in to a screen that's built into the dashboard, and there's no way of adjusting the subwoofer level up and down separate from that of the bass of the main speakers. You don't want to turn bass up and down because that's going to make your main speakers overload with low bass. You just want to turn the subwoofer level up and down from the amplifier itself. And so that's a really handy feature to have, and one I really recommend for anybody who's upgrading a factory sound system. And last but not least, it's the crossovers actually that I think are the most important thing to factor into when choosing an amplifier. And again, especially if you're using a factory head unit or your car's got an integrated source, the crossovers in the amplifier are going to be the things that are going to make or break the sound system. It's going to make it sound fantastic or just average. And so really consider the speaker systems you've got in your car and make sure that the amplifier you choose has got the exact filtering you need so you can tune those speakers to sound absolutely perfect. So now you're equipped with what you need to know to get your amplifier buying journey started. Now what I've done is I've done 3 more videos, one on monos, one on 4 channels and one on 5 channels that's more specific about those types of amplifiers and what you need to look for in those when purchasing. Links for those videos will be down below. While you're down there, like and subscribe. See you next time.